The lobby was the boss's newest obsession. It wasn't enough that his tech company, Apex Dynamics, was doing well. He wanted it to look like it was doing well, to feel like success the moment you walked in. He'd hired a fancy designer from the city, paid a fortune, and the result was cold. All sharp angles, glass walls the color of ice, and polished concrete floors that echoed with every step. It was impressive, maybe, but it felt like a museum, a very quiet, very expensive museum. Then, the centerpiece arrived, a grand piano. Not just any piano, but a snowfall white grand. It was so white it seemed to glow under the track lights. It sat in a perfect pool of light in the middle of the vast, empty space, a single, stunning sculpture. The boss, a man named Leo Sterling, stood back with the designer, a tight smile on his face. "Perfect," he said, his voice cutting the quiet. "It says we have culture, we have refinement. We appreciate the finer things. It's not for noise, it's for atmosphere." The staff walking through that first day glanced at it. Some raised their eyebrows. A few software engineers, their minds on code, almost walked into it. But it was there, and it was untouchable. A sign next to it, in small, elegant letters, read, "Apex Harmony. Please admire," which everyone understood really meant, "Do not touch." On the night shift, the lobby was a different world. The frantic energy of the day was gone, replaced by a deep, humming silence. The cleaning crew moved through with soft, efficient sounds. And there was the security guard. His name was Mikhail. He was in his late 50s, a big man who had once been bigger, his frame now looking a little soft around the edges. He had a calm, watchful face, eyes that had seen a lot and didn't feel the need to talk about it. He'd been with the building security for 3 years, reliable as sunrise. He did his rounds, checked his screens, made his notes. He was a piece of the night's furniture, quiet and expected. But Mikhail noticed the piano. How could he not? It was the only thing in the whole, cold lobby that looked like it was meant to be touched. On his first night after it arrived, he stopped a few feet away. He didn't go close. He just looked. His eyes, usually so careful and blank, changed. A light came into them, a kind of deep remembering. He didn't smile, but the hard line of his mouth softened just a little. A week later, on a slow night, he drifted closer. He walked around it, slowly. He looked at the curve of its side, the shine of the lid. His right hand, thick-fingered and marked with old scars, lifted from his side. He hesitated, then gently placed his fingertips on the cool, white lacquer. He didn't stroke it. He just let his hand rest there, as if feeling for a heartbeat. Then he took his hand away, nodded once to himself, and continued his round. He didn't know he was being watched. Leo Sterling often worked late, his corner office on the 3rd floor overlooking the lobby. He liked the view when it was empty. It looked clean, controlled, exactly as he'd ordered. One night, he was standing by his window, sipping expensive water, when he saw the guard. He saw Mikhail's slow circle around the piano. He saw the touch. A flicker of annoyance sparked in Sterling's chest. That piano cost more than the guard made in a year. It wasn't a pet. It wasn't for pawing at. It was a symbol. He made a mental note to say something to the security firm. He forgot about it, buried in spreadsheets and strategy. Then, a few nights later, he saw it again. It was past midnight. Sterling was stressed. A big deal was hanging by a thread. He looked down, and there was the guard. This time, Mikhail was just standing before the piano, his head slightly bowed, looking at the keys through the polished lid. He stood there for a full 2 minutes, perfectly still, lost in a thought a million miles away. That did it. The annoyance hardened into something colder. This was a pattern. This was a lack of respect. In Sterling's world, things had a place. Employees had a function. The guard's function was to guard, not to daydream over a piece of high-end art he could never understand. The next morning, Sterling didn't go straight to his office. He went to the facilities manager, a nervous man named Dan, whose job was to make sure the boss was happy. Sterling didn't sit down. Dan, the night security guard, the older one. Mikhail? Yes, sir. Is there a problem? There's a piano in the lobby, Sterling said, as if Dan might have missed it. Yes, sir. It's beautiful. It is. It's also not a community instrument. I've seen your man Mikhail getting familiar with it. Standing there, touching it. Dan's face palmed a little. Touching it. I'll speak to him, sir. He's a good employee. Very quiet. I don't care if he's quiet, Sterling interrupted, his voice low and sharp. I care that he understands boundaries. That piano is an investment in our brand. It is not for him. He leaned in slightly. I want you to make this very clear to him and to the security company. That instrument is for professional, vetted musicians only, for special events. It is asterisk not asterisk for the staff to fiddle with. Of course, sir, absolutely. Sterling turned to leave, then stopped. He looked back, his eyes cold. In fact, put this in his file. If I see his hands on those keys, if he ever actually tries to asterisk play asterisk that piano, he let the sentence hang, making sure Dan was listening. He's fired. No discussion. If he plays the piano, I'll fire him. You tell him that. The words hung in the air, final and brutal. Dan just nodded, muttering, "Understood, sir. I'll handle it." The message was delivered, not by Dan himself, but by the daytime security supervisor. He pulled Mikhail aside just as his shift was ending at 7 a.m. Mikhail had just finished his report, his body tired from the long night. "Hey, listen. Thing from upstairs. About the piano." Mikhail looked up, his face unreadable. "The big boss, Mr. Sterling, he's particular about it. It's a very expensive piece. He doesn't want anyone messing with it at all." The supervisor shuffled his feet, uncomfortable. He said, "And I'm just passing this on, you understand?" He said, "If you ever play it, you're gone. On the spot. Okay, just look at it from over there. Don't go near it." Mikhail listened. He didn't argue. He didn't ask why. He just gave a slow, single nod. The light that sometimes lived in his eyes when he looked at the piano went out, replaced by the careful, blank watchfulness of a guard on duty. "I understand," he said, his voice a soft, gravelly sound. "I will not touch it." He walked out into the gray morning light, the weight of the order settling on his shoulders. Back in the now empty lobby, the white piano sat in its pool of light, silent and beautiful, and more alone than ever. The line was drawn. The rule was set in stone. It was just a piece of furniture again, and Mikhail was just the man who guarded it, from a safe and careful distance. The pressure at Apex Dynamics had been building for weeks, a slow, steady tightening like a screw being turned. They were launching a new feature, something called SyncSphere, which was supposed to change how people used the internet. But it wasn't ready. It was full of bugs, little digital cracks that could break the whole thing. Leo Sterling's mood turned black. The polished calm he liked to show was gone, scraped away by missed deadlines and angry calls from investors. He snapped at his assistants. He threw reports. The whole office moved quietly around him, trying not to be the one who set him off. The lobby, his beautiful, silent lobby, became a place he stormed through, his expensive shoes clicking a furious rhythm on the concrete. He barely saw the white piano anymore. It was just part of the background, a piece of the expensive stage set that wasn't helping his show succeed. Mikhail, on his night shifts, felt the change in the building's energy. Even empty, it seemed to hum with the leftover stress. He did his job perfectly. He made his rounds, checked the doors, watched the monitors where little squares showed empty hallways and dark meeting rooms. He never went near the piano. He didn't even look at it for too long. He'd gotten the message, clear as glass. His job, the one that paid his rent and kept a small, warm apartment for him and his wife, depended on him ignoring the one beautiful thing in the cold space. Sometimes, in the deepest part of the night, he'd stand at the far side of the lobby, by the main doors, and just look across the distance at it. His hands, resting at his sides, would curl slightly, the fingers twitching with a memory of movement. He would then shake his head, a small, private motion, and turn back to his screens. One night, the crisis hit. A major test failed. The whole system crashed in a way the young programmers had never seen. Panic spread. Sterling was called at home. He drove back to the office, his jaw clenched so tight it ached. It was past 1 in the morning. The lobby was a tomb of shadows and the dim, security lighting. The white piano was a ghostly shape in the center. Upstairs on the 3rd floor, lights blazed in the engineering pit. Sterling could hear the frantic tapping of keys, the raised, tense voices of his team trying to fix the unfixable. He felt it all slipping away. The money, the respect, the whole story of himself as a brilliant success. He needed air, or maybe just to be somewhere that wasn't filled with the smell of fear and cold pizza. He took the elevator down, the silence of the car pressing on his ears. The doors opened into the lobby. He stepped out and took a deep breath. The air was cool and still. For a moment, it was peaceful. Then he saw movement. Mikhail was at the piano. The guard wasn't touching it. He was just standing there, closer than he should have been, his back to Sterling. He was perfectly still, his head bowed toward the closed lid. To Sterling, in his raw, angry state, it looked like a moment of prayer, or theft. A hot wire of fury flashed through Sterling's tired brain. After everything, after the explicit order, here was this man, this night watchman, defying him. In the middle of this disaster, here was one more thing not going right. One more person not listening. It was the final, stupid straw. He opened his mouth. The words, "What do you think you're doing?" already forming on his tongue. He was about to shout, to fire him on the spot, to take control of this one small thing he could actually control. And then Mikhail moved. It was a slow, deliberate movement, not furtive, not like someone about to do something wrong. It was respectful, almost ritualistic. He reached out with both hands and gently lifted the heavy fallboard, the cover that protected the keys. He set it back silently. The row of black and white keys lay exposed, glowing faintly in the low light. Sterling froze. The shout died in his throat. He was now a spectator, hidden in the shadow of the elevator bank. A cruel thought crossed his mind. Let him do it. Let him play some clumsy, childish tune. Then I can fire him for cause. A clean end to a bad night. Mikhail pulled the small, polished bench out and sat down. He adjusted it slightly. He straightened his back, and his posture changed completely. The slouch of the night guard vanished. He sat tall, shoulders squared, head held with a quiet dignity. He stretched his hands, those thick, worn hands, and let them hover just above the keys. For a second, there was nothing, just the vast, waiting silence of the empty building. Then Mikhail's right hand descended, not with a crash, but with a gentle, sure press. A single note sounded. It was a low C-sharp. It wasn't just a sound. It was a feeling. It was a deep, round, lonely tone that filled the hollow lobby and seemed to vibrate in Sterling's chest. It hung in the air, pure and clear, fading slowly. Then the left hand joined, a soft, rolling chord underneath, and the music began. It wasn't chopsticks. It wasn't some pop song. It was something ancient and full of night. It flowed, slow and sad and incredibly beautiful. The melody wound its way through the dark space, a river of sorrowful notes. It would swell with a painful sweetness, then fall back into a whisper. The chords underneath were rich and complicated, speaking of things words could never say. Sterling's breath caught. His anger, his panic, his whole chaotic world. It all stopped. The music didn't just enter his ears. It wrapped around him. He forgot about the crashed system upstairs. He forgot about firing anyone. He could only watch the man at the piano. Mikhail was gone. The security guard in the cheap uniform no longer existed. In his place was someone else entirely. His body moved with the music, a gentle rocking from side to side. His face, usually so blank, was alive with feeling, eyes closed, brow furrowed in concentration, his mouth a soft line of pain and memory. His hands, those scarred, working man's hands, were now creatures of grace. They flew over the keys, but softly, landing with precision and care, pulling the heartbreaking sound from the instrument. The music told a story. Sterling couldn't have named the piece. It was Chopin, but he didn't know that. But he could feel its story. It spoke of lost beauty, of a home left far behind, of a talent that had been put in a box and stored away. It was the sound of a quiet man screaming everything he never said. Sterling leaned against the cold wall, his legs weak. He felt like an intruder. He was spying on a soul laid bare. This wasn't a man disobeying an order. This was a man having a conversation with a ghost. And the piano was the only one who understood the language. The piece climbed to a gentle, aching peak, a cry of such clear, uncomplicated sadness that Sterling's eyes, to his own shock, stung. Then it resolved, falling back into a series of quiet, questioning notes, before ending on one final, gentle chord that melted into the silence. The last note faded. Mikhail didn't move for a long moment. He kept his hands on the keys, his head bowed, breathing slowly. Then, as carefully as he had begun, he lifted his hands. He stood up. He gently closed the fallboard over the keys, his fingers giving the white wood one last, almost invisible stroke. He turned, his face settling back into its usual, placid guard's mask. He picked up his flashlight from where he'd set it on the floor and clicked it on, its small beam cutting through the dimness. He began his slow walk toward the east hallway to continue his round, the soft shuffle of his shoes the only sound. He had no idea he had just shattered his boss's entire understanding of the world. Leo Sterling remained in the shadows, completely still. The silence now was different. It wasn't empty anymore. It was full of the echo of what he'd just heard. The fury that had brought him down here was gone, replaced by a deep, cold shame and a trembling, overwhelming curiosity. Who was that man? The silence after the last note was a heavy thing. Leo Sterling stood in the cold shadow of the elevator bank, glued to the spot. He watched the guard Mikhail walk away. The man's posture was back to the familiar, slightly stooped shape of the night watchman. The beam of his flashlight bobbed down the east hallway and disappeared. The transformation was over. The ghost was back in the box, but the music wasn't gone. It echoed in Sterling's head, a haunting loop. He walked out from the shadows, his steps slow and unsure on the concrete floor. He stopped a few feet from the piano. It looked the same as always, a perfect, silent sculpture, but it felt different now. It felt like a witness. It had just spoken a language Sterling never knew it could speak, with a voice he never knew that man had. The shame arrived first, hot and prickly. He'd been ready to fire him. He'd been poised to shout, to cut that man down, to punish him for touching this instrument. Sterling looked at his own hands, smooth and manicured. He'd never made anything beautiful with them. He'd only ever pointed, signed, and taken. He reached out, almost touching the piano's lid, but pulled his hand back. He felt he didn't have the right. A burst of laughter and tired voices came from the stairwell. The engineering team was heading down. The crisis apparently stabilized for the night. Sterling quickly turned and walked the other way, toward the back exit. He couldn't face them. He didn't want his sharp, clever employees to see his face right now. He probably looked as lost as he felt. He drove home through the empty streets, but he didn't really see the road. He saw the guard's hands, those thick, sturdy hands moving with a kind of tender authority. He heard the deep, sorrowful melody. It had been the sound of a secret. The next morning, the office was buzzing with a tired relief. The system was holding. The launch was still on life support, but it wasn't dead. Sterling arrived late, which was unusual. He walked through the buzzing lobby in the daylight. People were getting coffee, chatting. The piano was just background noise to them, a fancy prop. He felt a strange urge to stand in front of it and tell them all, "You have no idea. This isn't furniture." He went straight to his office and closed the door. He stared at his computer screen, but the numbers and charts meant nothing. The question hammered in his head, who is he? He called Dan, the facilities manager, to his office. Dan arrived looking nervous, expecting more complaints. "Sit down, Dan," Sterling said, his voice quieter than usual. Dan sat, perched on the edge of the chair. "The night guard, Mikhail. How long has he worked here?" "Oh, about 3 years, I think, with the security contractor." "What do we have on him?" "File, resume, anything?" Dan blinked. "For a security guard? Just the basic stuff from the contractor. Clean background check, reliable. That's about it. Is there a problem, sir? Did something happen last night?" Sterling ignored the question. "I want to see it. And I want you to call the head of the security company. Tell him I want any information they have. Previous jobs, anything." Dan was utterly confused, but he nodded. "Of course, sir. Right away." The file, when it arrived, was pathetic. A single page. Name, Mikhail Volkov. Date of birth, address, social security number. Employment history, security officer. Premier Shield Contracting. 3 years. Before that, custodian, City Public Library. 2 years. Before that, warehouse associate. Various. It was the resume of a man who did what he had to do to get by. It told Sterling exactly nothing. The security company owner, a man named Carl, was more puzzled than helpful on the phone. "Mikhail, good guy, quiet, never a problem. Shows up, does the job. Why? Has there been an issue?" "No issue," Sterling said, choosing his words carefully. "I'm just doing a review of all our service contracts. I noticed his employment history before you is spotty. Do you know anything about where he came from? Originally?" Carl thought for a moment. "Eastern Europe, I think. Came over a while back. Maybe 10, 15 years ago. He keeps to himself. I think he had a different life before, you know? But he never talks about it. Good worker, though. A different life." That was the phrase that stuck. Sterling ended the call and stared out his window at the gray day. A different life. A life that could make that kind of music. He spent the afternoon pretending to work. He'd try to focus on a report, and then a phrase from the music would float back into his mind. That aching, rising melody, and his concentration would shatter. He felt like he'd discovered a famous painting hanging in his janitor's closet, covered in dust. By late afternoon, he had to know more. It was an itch he couldn't scratch. He did something he almost never did. He left his desk and went to talk to people who weren't managers. He wandered down to the first-floor cafe, where some of the night cleaning staff were having an early dinner before their shift started. They were a tight group, separate from the tech employees. He approached a woman who was wiping tables. She looked up, startled to see the boss. "Hello," he said, forcing a smile that felt unnatural. "I was wondering if you know the night security guard, Mikhail?" The woman looked wary, her eyes narrowing. "Maybe. Why?" "No reason. I heard he's from another country. I was curious about his story." The woman relaxed a little, but she was still cautious. She shrugged. "He is from there, yes. A sad place, I think. He does not talk much. But his wife, sometimes she brings him dinner. A nice lady. She has kind eyes, but sad eyes too, like him." She went back to wiping the table. A clear signal the conversation was over. His wife. Sad eyes. Sterling went back to his office. He opened a search engine on his computer. He typed in Mikhail Volkov. Nothing. He tried Volkov pianist. A few social media profiles for people with that name. None of them his guard. Then, on a whim, he typed in the words he remembered from the music. Piano piece, sad night melody. It was useless. He leaned back, frustrated. The mystery was locked inside a quiet man who clocked in at 10 and clocked out at 6. He was about to give up when he remembered the hands. Specifically, the right hand. As Mikhail played, Sterling had noticed, in the glow of the exit sign, something odd. The last two fingers on his right hand didn't curve as smoothly as the others. They stayed a little straighter, moving together as a unit. A old injury. A damage. He typed in new words. Concert pianist hand injury Eastern Europe. He clicked on a news tab. And there it was. It was an article from a classical music website, dated over 12 years ago. The headline was in English. Promising young virtuoso's career halted after accident. The article was about a pianist from a country that no longer existed on the map. A child prodigy who had won competitions across Europe. His name was listed as Mikhail V. The article said he'd been critically injured in a car crash. While on tour, it listed injuries, broken ribs, a collapsed lung, and severe damage to the tendons in his right hand. Surgeons had saved the hand, but the article quoted a doctor saying, "The precision required for a solo concert career. It is unlikely. The dexterity will not return to its former state." There was a small, blurry black and white photo with the article. A young man in a formal suit, with a full head of dark hair, bowing on a stage. The face was younger, sharper, without the lines and the weary patience. But the eyes. Sterling leaned close to the screen. The eyes were the same. Watchful, deep. His heart thumped heavily in his chest. It was him. He kept reading. The article ended by saying the pianist had returned to his homeland to recover. Then, a few years later, Sterling found a brief mention in a community newsletter from his own city. A small notice about new residents welcomed by a local cultural association. It listed a Mikhail Volkov, former musician, and his wife, Irina. They had arrived 5 years ago. The pieces fell into place with a series of quiet, terrible clicks. The prodigy. The accident that stole his future. The political troubles in his region that would have made rebuilding a life there impossible. The journey to a new country with nothing. The library custodian job. The warehouse jobs. The night guard uniform. The music Sterling heard last night wasn't just a piece. It was a memory. It was a man visiting the ghost of his own talent. Playing a piano not to show off, but to see if the ghost would still answer. And it did, even with a damaged hand. Sterling closed the browser window. The office was quiet. The hum of the computer was the only sound. He looked around at his kingdom of glass and steel, at the charts of growth and the models of success. It all felt suddenly thin, like paper. He had built a castle of sand next to a mountain, and he hadn't even seen the mountain until last night. He had threatened to fire that mountain for touching a grain of sand. The weight of his own ignorance sat on him, heavy and uncomfortable. He thought of the decree he'd given Dan. If he plays the piano, I'll fire him. The words sounded so small and cruel now, spoken from a place of such profound not knowing. The man wasn't just a guard. He was a refugee. He was a husband. He was an artist who had lost his art, or at least the life that went with it. And he was here, in Sterling's lobby, keeping watch over a symbol of a refinement he would never understand. Except, Sterling realized with a jolt, he understood it better than any of them. He was the only one in the building who truly knew what that piano was for. Sterling knew what he had to do. It wasn't about business. It was about something else, something he hadn't practiced in a long time. It was about fixing a wrong. But first, he had to. The rest of the night was a blur for Leo Sterling. He didn't sleep. He sat in his dark living room, the city lights blinking outside his window, and the music played on a loop in his mind. But now it had pictures to go with it. The young man in the tuxedo, bowing, the medical report about torn tendons, the long, quiet fall from stages to warehouses to night shifts. He felt like he'd read someone else's private diary, and he had judged the cover without even opening it. The next day at the office, he was a ghost. He moved through meetings, but his thoughts were elsewhere. He'd look at the young, bright faces of his programmers, so sure of their own genius, and he'd think, *, you have no idea what genius even looks like. It wears a security uniform and hides in plain sight. *, the shame from the night before had settled into a hard, cold lump in his stomach. It wasn't just about being wrong. It was about the casual cruelty of his power. He had issued a sentence without a trial. He had looked at a man and seen a function, not a person. The do not touch sign might as well have been hanging around Mikhail's neck. By mid-afternoon, the feeling became unbearable. He couldn't let the sun set again without doing something. The problem was, he had no practice at this. Apologizing wasn't in his playbook. Fixing a bug in the code, firing a lazy executive, spinning bad news to investors, those were his skills. This was different. This was human. And it was messy. He thought about calling Mikhail into his office. The image felt immediately wrong. Too formal. Too much like a boss summoning an employee for a reprimand. That was the old dynamic, and he needed to break it. He waited. The workday ended. The office emptied out, filling with that familiar after-hours echo. He told his assistant he was working late and to cancel his evening calls. He felt nervous, a jittery feeling he hadn't known since his first investor pitch years ago, when the sky outside his window turned a deep blue. He took the elevator down to the lobby. It was that quiet, in-between time. The day staff was gone. The night cleaners hadn't yet arrived. Mikhail's shift would start soon. Sterling walked over to the piano. He stood where Mikhail had stood. He tried to see it through the guard's eyes, not as a statement piece, but as an old friend, a voice from a lost world. He put a hand on its cool surface, not owning it, just acknowledging it. The soft swoosh of the main glass door broke the silence. Sterling turned. Mikhail walked in. He was early, as always. He wore his dark uniform, his hat in his hand. He was clocking in mentally, his face already settling into the calm, neutral mask of his shift. Then he saw Sterling by the piano. Sterling saw the change immediately. A flicker of surprise, then a careful blankness. The guard's posture straightened just a bit, becoming more formal. His eyes became watchful, cautious. He was looking at the boss who had banned him from the instrument. He probably thought this was an inspection, that he was in trouble. "Good evening, sir," Mikhail said, his voice low and even. "Mikhail," Sterling said. His own voice sounded strange to him. Could you come here for a moment? Please." Mikhail hesitated for a second, then walked over. He stopped a respectful distance away, his hands behind his back, a soldier at attention. This was all wrong. Sterling felt the wall between them, thick and high. He had built it himself. "I need to talk to you," Sterling began. He wiped his palms on his trousers. About the piano, Mikhail's face didn't move, but his eyes seemed to shudder closed. He gave a small, tight nod. "I understand the rule. I will not go near it." He started to turn, as if to begin his rounds and end this uncomfortable conversation. "No," Sterling said, a bit too quickly. "That's not it. I was here last night. I heard you." Mikhail froze. He turned back slowly. The careful mask cracked, just for a second, revealing a flash of something underneath: alarm, maybe even fear. He was calculating the cost of a lost job, a shattered routine. He looked down at the floor. "I am sorry," he said, the words heavy. It was a moment of, "It will not happen again. You have my word." He was apologizing. The man who had created such heartbreaking beauty was apologizing to him. The wrongness of it cut through Sterling's nervousness. "Stop," Sterling said, softly. "Please, don't apologize. You have nothing to be sorry for." He took a breath, searching for the words. "What you played, it was the most. I have never heard anything like it. In this building, anywhere." Mikhail looked up, confused. The fear was still there, mixed with disbelief. He was waiting for the other shoe to drop. "I looked you up," Sterling admitted, feeling a fresh wave of shame at the admission. I know I know about the competitions, the accident. I know who you were." The word "were" hung in the air, and Sterling immediately wished he could take it back. It sounded so final. A sad, knowing smile touched Mikhail's lips, but it didn't reach his eyes. "That was another life, sir, a long time ago. But it's not gone," Sterling said, gesturing toward the piano. "I heard it. It's right there." Mikhail was silent for a long moment. He looked at the piano, then at his own hands. He flexed the fingers of his right hand slightly. The hand, it does not work as it did. The small movements, the fastest runs, they are for the young man in the picture, not for me. He spoke not with self-pity, but with a simple, tired truth. This life is a good life. It is quiet. It is honest. Sterling understood then. The music last night wasn't a comeback. It was a visit, a quiet conversation with a ghost he still carried. He wasn't hiding his talent out of modesty. He was protecting a memory that was too painful to expose to the daylight of expectation. "I owe you an apology," Sterling said, forcing himself to hold the other man's gaze. "A real one. What I said before, the threat I made, it was ignorant, and it was cruel. I saw a piece of furniture. You saw something else. I was wrong." Mikhail listened, his expression unreadable. He wasn't used to bosses apologizing. He gave a slow nod, accepting it, but the wall was still up. Sterling knew words weren't enough. An apology from a man like him was just more air in a room full of it. He needed to do something. An idea, fragile and half-formed, began to take shape. "Our big launch event for Syncsphere is next week," Sterling said. "Here in the lobby. There will be investors, press, everyone." Mikhail's face tightened again. He was picturing a crowd of strangers swarming his quiet night space. "No doubt. I have a request," Sterling continued. He chose the word carefully. "Not an order. A request. Before I give my speech, before the noise starts, the piano will be here, center stage. Everyone will be looking at it." He paused, gathering his courage. "I would like you to play for them." Mikhail's eyes went wide. He took a small step back, shaking his head. "No, sir, no. That is not. I am not that person anymore. I play for the empty night, not for a crowd. That's why it should be you," Sterling said, his voice gaining a bit of strength. "Because for them, it's just a fancy decoration. For you, it's real. You could show them what it's actually for, not for looking." For feeling asterisk, he could see the panic in the older man's face. It was the fear of being seen, truly seen, after so many years of hiding in a uniform. The fear of those old, judging eyes on his damaged hands. "I cannot," Mikhail said firmly, his accent thickening with emotion. "Please, do not ask this." Sterling nodded. He wouldn't force him. That would be just another kind of command. "Okay," he said softly. "I understand. The request stands, but I understand." He turned to leave, the disappointment a bitter taste. He had tried to fix it, and had only made the man more uncomfortable. He had taken a few steps when Mikhail's voice stopped him. What would I play?" Sterling turned back. Mikhail was looking at the keys, his brow furrowed in deep thought. "Whatever you played last night," Sterling said. It was perfect. Mikhail was silent, his internal war visible on his face. The part of him that had once lived for the applause battling the part that had found peace in the shadows. That peace. "It is a farewell," he said quietly. "It is for looking back. Then play something else," Sterling said. "Play something for now." Mikhail looked at him, really looked at him, for the first time. He was no longer looking at the boss, but at the man who had heard his ghost. He gave a slow, almost imperceptible nod. "I will think about it," he said. It wasn't a yes, but it wasn't a no. "Thank you," Sterling said, and he meant it for more than just the maybe. He walked back to the elevators, leaving Mikhail alone with the piano and the choice. As the elevator doors closed, he saw Mikhail still standing there, his hand resting lightly on the piano's lid, not as a guard keeping watch, but as a musician listening for an answer. The wall, Sterling felt, hadn't fallen, but a single, small door had been opened in it. The week crawled by. The launch event for Syncsphere became the only thing anyone at Apex Dynamics could talk about. The lobby was transformed. A small stage was built. Lighting rigs were hung, throwing dramatic pools of light. The white piano was polished until it gleamed like a moon in the center of it all. It was, as Leo Sterling had always intended, the perfect symbol. But for him, its meaning had changed completely. He didn't ask Mikhail again. He saw the guard on his nightly rounds, and they would exchange a simple nod. Mikhail's face gave nothing away. He did his job, checking the new equipment, moving through the growing buzz of preparation with his usual quiet detachment. Sterling wondered if he'd decided against it. The thought made him sad, but he had promised himself he wouldn't push. The night before the event, Sterling was working late again. He came down to the lobby to check on the final setup. It was after midnight. The space was empty, filled with the potential of tomorrow's noise. And there, at the piano, was Mikhail. He wasn't playing. He was just sitting on the bench, his hands in his lap, looking at the keys under the work lights. He looked like a man sitting on the edge of a cliff, deciding whether or not to jump. Sterling didn't approach. He just watched from the shadows, as he had that first night. After a few minutes, Mikhail's shoulders rose and fell in a deep sigh. He reached out, played a simple chord of C major. It sounded plain, hopeful, and utterly different from the sorrowful music of before. Then he closed the lid, stood up, and walked away without a sound. Sterling felt a spark of something in his chest. It wasn't a yes, but it was a maybe. And a maybe was enough. The day of the event arrived. The lobby was packed. Important-looking people in sharp suits and stylish dresses held glasses of sparkling water. The air hummed with talk of data streams and market disruption. The piano was a popular backdrop for selfies. Sterling moved through the crowd, shaking hands, smiling his CEO smile. But his eyes kept drifting to the instrument. He saw Mikhail, too. The guard was stationed politely near the main doors, in full uniform, watching the crowd with a professional eye. He looked completely separate from the glittering event, a part of the building's machinery. No one glanced at him twice. The time came for Sterling's speech. He stepped onto the small stage, a microphone in his hand. The crowd quieted, turning their expectant faces toward him. The bright lights were hot. Welcome, he began, the familiar lines of his speech rolling out. He talked about innovation, about the future, about breaking boundaries. He talked about SyncSphere. The words felt hollow in his mouth, like pebbles. He was going through the motions. His mind was elsewhere. He finished his prepared remarks to polite applause. He looked out at the sea of faces, then at the white piano, then at Mikhail, standing solid and still by the door. He leaned into the microphone again. The applause died down. "There's one more thing," he said, his voice different now, less polished, more human. "We have a tradition here at Apex. Before we talk about the future, we take a moment to remember that the best technology, the best ideas, they don't come from machines. They come from people, from human experience." He saw the confusion on some faces. This wasn't on the agenda. "This piano isn't just decoration," he continued, walking over to it. He placed a hand on its lid. "It's an instrument, and its purpose is to translate feeling into sound." He paused, searching for the right words. "We're privileged tonight to have someone play for us who understands that better than anyone I've ever met." He turned and looked directly at the doors. Mikhail. A ripple of confusion went through the crowd. Heads turned. Who was Mikhail? The security guard? People near the doors stepped back, creating a small space around him. Mikhail looked up. For a long second, he didn't move. His face was pale under the lobby lights. He looked at Sterling, then at the crowd, then at the long, open path between him and the piano. It might as well have been a mile. Sterling just waited, his hand still on the piano. He gave a single, slow nod. It's okay. Mikhail closed his eyes for a brief moment. When he opened them, something had settled. He took off his security cap and placed it carefully on a nearby table. Then, he began to walk. The crowd parted silently for him. The chatter was gone, replaced by a puzzled, heavy silence. All you could hear was the soft scuff of his polished shoes on the floor. He reached the piano. He didn't look at the crowd. He looked only at the instrument. He sat down on the bench, adjusted it just so, and straightened his back. The transformation Sterling had seen in the empty night began again, but this time under 100 watching eyes. The night guard vanished. The musician took his place. He didn't play the sad farewell from the other night. His hands hovered, then descended. The music that came out was different. It was still classical, still complex and beautiful, but it had a different heart. It started softly, a gentle, questioning melody. It felt like a sunrise after a long darkness. It was tentative, exploring. Then, it grew stronger. The left hand built a foundation of warm, rolling chords, and the right hand sang a melody over it that was full of a quiet, resilient hope. It wasn't flashy. It wasn't the furious, technical showpiece of a young prodigy. This was the music of a man who had known deep winter and was carefully, note by note, discovering a spring within himself. The damaged fingers on his right hand moved with a slight stiffness on the fastest passages, a barely noticeable hitch, but instead of sounding like a flaw, it sounded like a part of the story. It gave the music a raw, honest texture. This wasn't a perfect recording. This was a living man, with a mended hand, speaking his truth. The crowd was absolutely still. The investors forgot their portfolios. The journalists forgot their questions. The tech employees, used to the logic of code, were disarmed by this pure, illogical emotion. Some people just stared, mesmerized. Others slowly looked down at the floor, the music touching a private place inside them. A woman near the front brushed a silent tear from her cheek. Sterling watched from the side of the stage. He wasn't watching a performance. He was watching a man come home. For 3 minutes, the lobby wasn't a tech company's showcase. It was a cathedral. The piece wound its way to a close, not with a dramatic bang, but with a series of resolving chords that felt like a peaceful breath being released. The final note hung in the air, sweet and clear, and then faded into a silence so deep you could hear the hum of the lights. For a moment, nothing happened. Mikhail kept his head bowed, his hands resting on the keys. Then, the applause began. It wasn't the polite clapping from before. It was a wave of genuine, emotional sound. It was loud and sustained. People stood up. They weren't just applauding the music. They were applauding the shock of something real in the middle of all the polish. Mikhail stood up. He turned to face the crowd, and for the first time, he looked at them. He didn't smile. He gave a small, old-fashioned bow from the waist, the kind a concert artist might give. His face was calm, but his eyes were bright. Then, he quickly walked off the little stage, through the still clapping crowd, and back to his post by the doors. He put his cap back on, and once again, he became the guard. But he was changed, and everyone had seen it. Sterling stepped back to the microphone. The applause slowly died down. He looked out at the crowd, his own eyes feeling suspiciously warm. "That," he said, his voice thick with an emotion he didn't try to hide, "is what we're really building here. Not just technology. A place where human beings can bring their whole selves, their history, their talent, even the parts they think they've left behind." He didn't announce a new stock option or a corporate initiative. He announced something simpler. Starting next month, that piano is no longer just for show. It will be available, during certain hours, for anyone here to play. And we are starting a small fund, the Apex Harmony Fund, to support the continuing education and hidden passions of every person who works in this building, in any capacity. Because you never know what kind of music is waiting to be heard. The event ended not with a sales pitch, but with a feeling. People left talking in hushed, thoughtful tones. They talked about the music. They talked about the guard. Later, when the lobby was empty again and the cleanup crew was working, Sterling found Mikhail finishing his shift report at the security desk. "Thank you," Sterling said. It was all he could think to say. Mikhail looked up. The guarded wall was gone. In its place was a tired piece. "It was a good piece to play," he said. "It is called Morning, by a composer from my country. It is about beginning again." Sterling nodded. He reached into his pocket and took out a simple, white card. It was a business card, but he'd written on the back. It was the name and private number of the head of the city's symphony orchestra, an old college friend. "If you ever want to talk to someone about music," Sterling said, placing it on the desk. "Not for a job, just to talk." As one person to another, Mikhail looked at the card. He didn't pick it up immediately. He just looked at it. Then he gave a small, genuine smile. "Thank you," he said. Sterling walked away, leaving the night to its keeper. The next morning, the lobby was back to normal. The stage was gone, but the piano remained. And sometimes, in the late afternoons, you could hear the soft, hesitant notes of a beginner trying to learn, or an employee quietly playing a pop song. The "do not touch" sign was gone.